Last math lesson for week 1. How great is that to hear? So today we're going to do the other two operations for fractions. We did adding and subtracting. This lesson is going to be geared towards multiplying and dividing when you have fractions that are negative. And for your work today, make sure that your answers and the work that you do reflect fractions, not decimals. So since we're dealing with fractions, let's actually show answers and work with fractions. So I'm going to go over some important key ideas surrounding multiplying and dividing fractions, then we'll do a few examples, and then that's it. So here we go. Some key ideas for multiplying and dividing negative fractions. Thing 1, unlike adding and subtracting, where you need a common denominator as your first step, you don't need common denominators when you multiply or divide fractions. Not needed. It's a waste of time. If you do it, you will ultimately get the correct answer, but your initial answer is going to be very big because you've made your fractions bigger and didn't need to, and then you're going to have to do a lot of simplifying. So don't find common denominators when you multiply or divide fractions. Key idea number 2, you cannot multiply or divide when you have mixed numbers. You have to make them improper first. So as a quick refresh, in case you forgot, this is a mixed number, and to make it improper, you need to multiply the denominator, which in this case is 2, by the whole number and add it to the numerator. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So this fraction is the same as 7 halves. And if you were multiplying or dividing with 3.5, you'd have to write it in this form first. Now, once you've made sure all of your fractions are proper or improper, no mixed numbers, and you have not found common denominators because you don't need to, you can then multiply or divide, and multiplying and dividing is quite simple. For multiplying fractions, all you need to do is simply multiply the top numbers together, called the numerators, and then multiply the denominators together, and then simplify. That's it. And then for dividing fractions, you don't actually divide at all. There's no division for fractions. Instead, you actually multiply. You multiply by the reciprocal, and reciprocal, that's this word right here, is just fancy for the inverse. So let's say we had the fraction 1/3. Its reciprocal is the inverse. You flip it, 3/1. Or if I had the fraction, actually let's go with a whole number. If I had a whole number 7, that's the same as 7/1, and its inverse is 1/7. It's reciprocal. Anyways, why did I say that? Because to divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction in the division problem. Some people remember this by saying the phrase keep, change, flip. All that means is, let's say I had 1/2 divided by 2/3. You keep the first fraction the same, you multiply by the reciprocal, so you change the division to multiplication, and the flip, that's what we mean with reciprocal. You flip it, so this multiplication problem is the same as this original division problem, and then that's how you divide. You'll actually multiply. And so let's do a couple practice problems to put all of this into perspective. Nothing changes if things are negative. You're just going to use your negative rules. One of the little tricks that some people use to remember their their negative multiplying and dividing rules is they use a little tic-tac-toe board, and you start off by putting a P for positive right down the diagonal middle, and then you fill in everywhere else with an N. And what that does is it gives, anywhere you read this, it tells you your rules. A positive times a negative is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. So no matter how you read this, it has all of your rules built into it. Fun little trick, might help you if you forget. Either way, let's do this. Here I've got a negative times a positive, so I know my final answer is going to be negative something. And now let's just deal with the numbers. There's no improper fractions here, so I can just multiply top times top, bottom times bottom. So 2 times 1 is 2. and 7 times 3 is 21, and that is simplified already. So boom, easy. First one, negative 2 over 21. It's negative because I'm doing a positive times a negative, which is a negative. All right, next problem. I immediately see I have a mixed number. I need to make it improper. So as a first step, I'm going to rewrite my multiplication problem. 1/3, negative 1/3 times negative 11/4. And I got 11/4 by doing 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11. And the first thing I like to do is just get the sign down. A negative times a negative is a positive, so I know I'm going to have a positive final answer. Now I'm going to deal with the numbers themselves. 1 times 11 is 11. 3 times 4 is 12. 11/12 is already simplified. And like we had just said, a negative times a negative is a positive. So I know it's positive 11/12. I wanted to do one that has multiple steps in it just to look at one of these. We've got negative 1/7 times 4/5 times negative 7 times negative 1/2. It looks like a lot, but if you break it into chunks, you can do this quite easily. The first thing I'd like to note is what is the ultimate sign going to be in my final answer, positive or negative? Well, I have a negative times a positive, so that's going to be negative. And then this negative times another negative is a positive. And then a positive times a negative means my final answer is going to be negative. So now we can disregard the signs completely. We know that our final answer is going to be negative, so now let's just deal with the numbers themselves. So I'm just going to go right from left to right. If you have only multiplication in a problem, technically you can do it in any order you want, and it will not change your answer. But just to keep things simple, I'm just going to do one thing at a time from left to right. So 1 times 4 is 4. 7 times 5 is 35. Next thing I'm going to do is multiply that by 7, which can be written as a fraction, 7/1. One thing you can do so that your numbers don't get too large is you can cross simplify if you want. So for example, 7 and 35 are diagonal from one another, and those share a common factor of 7. So you could simplify both of those if you wanted to. I won't do that. I'll keep the fractions just how they are. But if you remember how to cross simplify, feel free to do that. And then my last step is 28 times 1 is 28. 35 times 2 is 70. And I'm going to need to simplify here because both of these numbers have a common factor. You could divide them both by 2, or you might see both of those are divisible by 7, and that'll get the answer simplified a little bit quicker. So 28 divided by 7 is 4. 70 divided by 7 is 10, and 4/10 can be divided by 2, and that will end up with 2/5 as your final answer. Now, we had already done the work before, I had done the work, and found out that my final answer was going to be negative, so negative 2/5 is your best possible simplified final answer. All right, and the last thing we'll do is, since I didn't do a division problem, we should do that. For division, you multiply by the reciprocal. That means you change the division to multiplication and you flip the second fraction. Now, before I do that, I need to rewrite this fraction, since it's mixed, as an improper. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, so 2 2/3 is the same as 8/3. But I need to flip that fraction, because keep, change, flip, multiply by the reciprocal. So 8/3 needs to be written as 3/8. And you don't touch the first fraction, that stays the same, you keep it the same. So my original division problem was rewritten as this multiplication problem. They mean the same thing, and now I can go ahead and multiply. 1 times 3 is 3. 8 times 3 is 24. A negative times a positive means my final answer is negative. And I can simplify that. 3 and 24 are both divisible by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. And 24 divided by 3 is 8. So my final answer here is negative 1 over 8. Best possible answer. Negative 1/3 divided by 2 and 2/3 is equal to negative 1 over 8. That's all I have for this lesson. A couple example problems and a couple key tips. Hopefully you can use those to complete today's work successfully. And I hope that you, when you get it done, are able to enjoy your Friday and enjoy your weekend. Happy summer. See ya.